Today on the Bourbon Bytes Podcast, new bourbon releases, including Peerless 10-year bourbon, a new expression of Daniel Weller, and the latest batches of Jack Daniel's 10, 12, and 14. Then we have a bite-sized review of the new Bardstown Bourbon Company Cascadia Garryana Oak Finish. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bourbon Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Clifton, and this is the week of Thursday, March 26th, 2026. I feel like this year is flying by. We're almost into Q2. But the good thing is there's lots of whiskey news and new releases that I'm hearing about every day. So we're already set to be a very exciting year in the world of whiskey. Today's goal is to share some of those news articles with you, as well as some breaking news in the video game industry that I'd like to talk about. But first, we'll start with the good news because we have a lot of bourbon coming out of Kentucky, one of which is a new 10-year-old expression of Peerless bourbon. This is going to be a distillery release on April 22nd, and this is in honor of the fact that they've been aging whiskey there for over 10 years. Now, it looks like they're going to be releasing this in different batches. This is labeled as batch 1 of their 10-year bourbon. And other than that, we don't really know much. There's a little teaser picture of the bottle. They're calling it the Henry Craver Old Reserve. And this is actually being released on his birthday. He is the founder of Peerless. So you can RSVP for that distillery release. I don't know anything about pricing or how many bottles are available. Knowing Peerless, it's probably going to be up there in price, but I know Peerless is dedicated to making really quality bourbon and rye, and they have lots of fans, so I'm sure that will sell out very, very quickly. I'm excited to see new, older releases from them. I'm hoping that it means that their pricing on maybe some of their younger stuff will come down a bit since their stuff is coming of age and they're having a lot more aged stock. I think that's my only issue I've ever had with Peerless. I love the flavor profile. I love the bourbon and the rye, but I don't love the pricing. So I don't know how much this one's going to be. It'll probably be a pass for me, but I think it would probably be a pretty fantastic bourbon. Speaking of fantastic bourbon, Buffalo Trace has a brand new release. It is the next chapter in the Daniel Weller experimental line, and it's called Spelt Wheat. This is the second edition of the lineup. The first came out back in 2023 with the Emmer Wheat. And with each of these, the goal of this is to be a focused experiment. So they are only changing a single variable that can change the final whiskey. So for this one, they are using spelt wheat, even though it's rarely used in whiskey production. It says it was cultivated for thousands of years, primarily in Europe, and it is recognized for its subtle sweetness and gentle nuttiness. It's most often used in small-scale grain farming and artisanal baking. And it says that Buffalo Trace was drawn to Spelt not only for its flavor potential, but for its historical significance as one of the earliest cultivated wheat varieties. This one's going to be bottled at 94 proof and aged 10 years. Now, all this sounds fine and dandy, but then you realize the price of this bottle. So as with the other release in the lineup, this is going to be a pretty hefty price tag, coming in at $549.99 MSRP. It is a very pretty bottle, I'll give them that, and it is, of course, a Weller product, but that pricing to me is so crazy for a 10-year bourbon. Now, they say this will be available in limited quantities to distributors, shipping to select retailers, bars, and restaurants across the U.S. starting this month. I feel like I had to report on it because whenever there's a new Buffalo Trace product, everyone wants to hear about it. But is it one that I'm particularly excited for? No, I like the idea of exploring heritage grains. I think a lot of distilleries are doing that, and some of them do it really, really well at a much more affordable price point. So let me know what you guys think of this new Daniel Weller release. On the opposite end of the pricing spectrum, Evan Williams is releasing a Bourbon Nation Collegiate Edition for 5 different universities in the U.S. Now, this is going to be a highly limited release, and it celebrates the University of Alabama, University of Florida, Syracuse University, TCU, and the University of South Carolina. Being from South Carolina, that's pretty exciting. I didn't go there, but, South Carolina bottles are cool to collect. Now, the good news is this isn't just a pretty bottle. While it does feature the university's logo on it, they are each hand-selected single barrels. And they're going to be exclusively distributed within each school's home state. So it's going to be very local, very limited for those fans of those teams or those universities. They're going to bottle this at 86.6 proof, and pricing is going to be $34.99. Now, Heaven Hill says that these Bourbon Nation Collegiate editions give fans and alumni a meaningful way to celebrate their schools, whether they're cheering during tournament season, marking graduation, or simply sharing a glass with fellow fans. Now, the good news is this isn't going to be the only batch of this. They're actually already planning a second wave of these collegiate editions for the fall football season, and they're going to announce that lineup later this year. If you're curious what the bottles look like, they are each the colors of the university. They look a lot like the Evan Williams single barrel bottles. In fact, they are the Evan Williams single barrel, but the label says Bourbon Nation Collegiate Edition, and they each have a neck tag for the university as well. That's really cool. I think I'm going to try to pick up a bottle of the University of South Carolina one next time I'm back home. But let me know, are you fans of releases like this, or do you think it's kind of just a gimmick? Remember last year when Maker's Mark had the Champions edition of their single barrel for the Dodgers? That one was one of my favorite releases like this, and it actually ended up being one of my top 10 whiskeys of last year, just because it wasn't just a pretty bottle. It was actually selected by folks on the Dodgers team and their associates. This doesn't necessarily specify that these single barrels were picked by the universities themselves, but they do say they are single barrel releases, so to be determined, but they are really, really cute. Now, for fans of collecting things, Jack Daniel's just announced a new batch of 10-year, 12-year, and 14-year-old bourbon that's going to be available at the distillery. And this time, they're giving you an opportunity to reserve the bottles in advance. So they're doing a drawing. On April 7th is the deadline to get your entries in. You'll have a guaranteed chance to purchase a designated bottle from these new batches at MSRP. So Jack Daniel's 14 is $152.99, Jack Daniel's 12 is $102.99, and Jack Daniel's 10 is $89.99. All of these plus local taxes. Now, the caveat is you actually have to go pick these up in person by June 12th of this year. You can't send a proxy, unfortunately. You have to be the person that goes to pick it up. If you're local, that's great. If you live in California like me, that's a bit of an expensive journey just to pick up some bottles, unless you already have it planned. Doing a little digging into the terms and conditions, it says they will randomly select 500 potential winners. Now, of course, not all 500 of those people are going to actually go pick up their bottle, but it is interesting to see it broken down. They say there'll be 100 winners of Jack Daniel's 14, 150 winners of Jack Daniel's 12, and 250 winners of Jack Daniel's 10. Now, remember, winner means you have the right to purchase. You're not actually getting the bottle for free. So keep that in mind, but it seems like a fun thing to do if you're local to the area. I think it's one of the best opportunities to get those rare bottles, and especially with them being new batches, I think people are going to seek those out really, really quickly. So if you want to get in, don't forget to enter by April 7th. All right, well, I do want to do a speed run of 3 new TTB labels that I've come across on Coming Whiskey. One of which is Barrell Seagrass Toasted. If you remember, Barrell Seagrass is my favorite of their lineup. It is a rye whiskey finished in Martinique rum, Madeira, and apricot brandy barrels. Well, now they are releasing it as a toasted release, so it's going to be further matured in Grand Cru American oak barrels. Now, this is going to also be released at 122 proof, and I'm extremely excited for this. I love Barrell Seagrass. It's one of the most unique whiskeys I've ever had. And they're going to do an additional 36 months of aging in that toasted cask. So I am absolutely going to keep an eye out for that. I just love Seagrass, and anything they do to make it even crazier, I'm down for. Now, coming to us from Lux Row, they have just announced Blood Oath Pact 12. This was going to be finished in Montepulciano and Sangiovese casks. It says this is a blend of 9-year-old rye and 12-year-old rye bourbons, as well as a 7-year-old rye bourbon finished first in the Montepulciano, which is a fruit-forward dry red wine from the Abruzzo region of Italy, and then a secondary finish in Sangiovese, which is a savory, dry Italian red wine, primarily from the Tuscany region. I am a huge Sangiovese fan. It's actually one of my favorite varieties of red wine. So I'm definitely curious about this. In the past, I've kind of felt meh about these Blood Oath releases, especially the ones with like red wines. They just, to me, don't always stand up to a bourbon. But if you are a fan of those, this is going to be bottled at 98.6 proof, as always, and it's going to be released at a minimum suggested retail price of $129.99 a bottle. It's going to be available for in-person purchases at Lux Row starting on April 25th while supplies lasts. And a limited supply of 17,000 3-pack cases will arrive at retail in June. So if you missed a chance to get it at the distillery in April, check back to your local retailer in June. All right, lastly, this one's a crazy one. Four Roses is starting an experimental series, the first of which is a Mizunara cask finish. It's going to be their Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey finished in Mizunara casks. They say that this experimental series honors our time-tested craftsmanship while daring to explore new recipes and finishing techniques that will define the next chapter of bourbon. Now, again, this is just the TTB label, so I don't know the age of this whiskey, but it will be bottled at 104 proof and available at a 375 milliliter bottle. So this might be a distillery-only thing, kind of like what Woodford Reserve does, but it's always fun to see a distillery get into new territory, especially when it comes to finishing, because I think it's something that these traditional distilleries haven't done too much in the past, but we're starting to see it more and more. So I'm definitely going to keep my eye on that. As I learn more, I will be happy to share it with you. All right, well, before we get into our review, I do have one piece of gaming news. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a bummer. So on March 24th, earlier this week, Epic Games announced that they were laying off over 1,000 employees. They say that this is due to the downturn in Fortnite engagement that started back in 2025. And they say they're spending significantly more than they're making and have to make major cuts to keep the company funded. They also identified over $500 million of cost saving in contracting, marketing, and closing some open roles to put them in a more stable place. Layoffs are always so tough to hear, but this one is especially hard. Do you remember when there was a layoff earlier this year at Ubisoft and they laid off their team that was working on the new Prince of Persia game because of games like Fortnite? You know, they said that kids are playing more of these games that just have seasons and DLC, and they want less of a single-player adventure game. Well, now it sounds like Fortnite may not be in a great place like you may think they are. And that's a really scary thought because this is the biggest name in the world of gaming. And for them to do a major layoff like this says a lot. So I'm raising a glass tonight to all the folks at Epic Games who are affected by this. Hopefully, I'm hearing that other indie developers are hiring quite a bit more, especially compared to the big guys like Epic or Ubisoft. So hopefully they find their place at one of these other companies and can help create really cool IP that's never been done before. I'm wishing them all the best. Cheers to those folks. All right, well, with that being said, let's get back to the bourbon and get into our bite-sized review. All right, well, this week's bite-sized review is actually kind of hilarious because I just announced this whiskey last week on the podcast and talked about how excited I was for the chance to try it. Well, lo and behold, a couple days later, a media sample from Bardstown Bourbon Company showed up at my doorstep, so I'm very excited to offer you a first impression review of the new Cascadia Garryana Oak Barrel Finish Bardstown Bourbon Company Distillery Reserve release. That was a mouthful. This is a blend of straight bourbon whiskey finished for 10 months in Garryana oak barrels. So I did a full breakdown of this release last week, but I'll give you a quick little overview. This is made up of 9 and 10-year-old bourbon from Kentucky and Indiana. And like I said, it was rested for 10 months in Garryana oak barrels. So Garryana oak is native only to the Pacific Northwest. It is considered dense and fiercely rare, and it can't be farmed or cut at will, but rather gathered only from fallen trees and sanctioned harvests. So they're very protective of this Garryana oak. I've had a few other Garryana oak bourbons and have tend to really enjoy the flavor profile. So when I saw this one, knowing how good Bardstown Bourbon Company is with their blending, I was incredibly excited. Now, what's even further interesting is these barrels feature a 3-hour toast. So this is technically a toasted Garryana release. It's going to come in at 107.5 proof, and it's going to be available for purchase at the distillery gift shop and its tasting room in Louisville. And I do want to mention that this comes in a 375 milliliter bottle, and it's going to be available for $99.99 retail. They say that this Distillery Reserve label is a platform for small-scale innovation, offering one-time-only releases that explore the boundaries of whiskey through experimental finishes, aging, and uncommon blending. But now, I'm excited to get a chance to try it thanks to the folks over at Bardstown Bourbon Company for providing the sample. Let's go ahead and get into this whiskey. Let's start with the nose. Ooh, yeah, right off the bat, I'm getting that little bit of like a barbecue smoke on it. Not as sweet as I might have expected. A lot of times toasted oak to me reads a lot of vanilla and marshmallow, which it might still on the palate, but on the nose, that is a little bit smoky. Not peated, but smoky. Lots of tobacco and cigar kind of notes in there. Surprisingly dark and rich, which, I mean, with it being 9 and 10-year-old bourbon, that makes sense. I'm getting a little bit of sweetness, but it's definitely more in the dark, rich, toffee character. So I'm really excited to see how this is going to do on the palate. Let's go for a taste. Cheers. Ooh, okay. Definitely does a bit of a 180 there on the palate. It immediately is sweeter than I expected. It isn't quite that marshmallow note that some toasted bourbons give me. It's actually much more of like a mellow note. The smokiness is still there, but it's almost like a smoked vanilla, if that makes sense. Again, not like melted marshmallow like I've gotten on some other ones. It's still a very much bourbon lover's vanilla. And the oak really does show up there. Beyond just the toasted part of it, it has some good age on it. You can just feel based on the mouthfeel and the bit of the tannins at the back of the throat. This is a very well-aged bourbon. I'm still getting that tobacco. That's like a pretty dominant flavor. And I've read some other reviews of Garryana bourbon that have mentioned that note. I just don't specifically recall it from previous releases, but it seems to be a common, unique characteristic of this oak. And I will say for sure it's there. It's got a nice tobacco leaf, definitely a dry tobacco, less of a sweet tobacco. The sweetness is all of those baking sweetness, not necessarily fruity. Like I said, toffee for sure, that sticks around. Maybe a little bit of nuttiness, like kind of like a hint of peanut brittle, but very, very subtle. Overall, everything just really complements itself really well. I mean, the smokiness, the tannins, the vanilla, the toffee, just so good. Finish-wise, I'll say this is a pretty long finish, especially for 107.5 proof. It does drink like a heftier, higher proof bourbon, which I can appreciate. On the finish, it's a lingering smokiness, a little bit of a bright note there. I think it just may be the way that the toasted oak is expressing itself, but it almost went minty a little bit. Not quite like a rye all the way, but a little bit of like a peppermint mintiness. Just on the very, very teensy end of the finish. It kind of goes up like a little asterisk at the end, like a little woo. I like that. I like it. It's complex. It's got a lot of impact from those wood sugars, and I like how they're expressing on this bourbon. I've not had any of the other Bardstown Distillery Reserve releases, so I can't compare it to those releases. But for this being a one-off release, distillery only, I think there's a lot to enjoy about it. If you're a fan of the bourbon that Bardstown Bourbon Company puts out, especially the sourced bourbon from Kentucky and Indiana, you're going to like this. The Garryana doesn't do anything crazy with the palate. It doesn't make you taste like Cinnamon Toast Crunch like some other oaks do, but it really just refines that flavor, and it really brings out some really interesting characteristics that I don't think would have been there if it didn't have that, or if it were just toasted American oak or toasted French oak. There's really some nuances there that I think make this a very special bourbon. So that being said, I'm going to give my rating. Like I said, for my bite-sized reviews, I give you just one review with my overall recommendation. I consider price, availability, proof, nose, palate, finish, all of the above. And I think if you are a avid fan of Bardstown Bourbon Company and you have a chance to get this at the distillery, I do give it a recommendation. I'm going to give this a 8 out of 10. I think pricing is quite a bit high. So it's $100 for a 375. So double that for $750, $200. $200 for a 10-year-old bourbon, a bit high. But like I said, it is a very limited release. It's distillery, gift shop, and tasting room only. This might be one of the better toasted bourbons I've ever had. So 8 out of 10 is my score for this one. I think it would have only done better if it was more available and the price was a little bit lower. Flavor-wise, nose-wise, I mean, just as a general release, it's great. So well done to the folks at Bardstown Bourbon Company. It makes me really curious to try more of these distillery reserve releases. I mean, if they put that much time and attention into this to make it this great, I can't wait to see what they do with other, different finishes, different aging, and uncommon blending. So it's definitely fun. I think it would be a fun flight to do if I had a chance to try the other releases. Maybe I'll reach out to them and see if we can have them on to taste through some other ones. That was a really fun stream, by the way. If you missed it, I was live with Jazz. She's the national brand ambassador for Bardstown Bourbon Company. We did a live stream probably 2 or 3 months ago. But it was a really great time. She's great. And I really do recommend this. This is really good. So as of now, every Garryana oak bourbon or American whiskey that I've tried has been a hitter. So it seems to be kind of one of my favorite finishes. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to everyone who has supported the channel through the Byte Club. If you don't know, you can support for as little as $2 a month on bourbonbytes.com or patreon.com/bourbonbytes. Your support means a ton to me. Want to give a shout out to our newest bourbon terabyte, Tony Bag of Donuts, who has been a supporter of the channel for many, many years, has just recently upped his tier, so he's going to be joining us for our monthly tasting hangout. That's where we do samples of 5 different whiskeys, and we taste them together. We go through notes, comparisons, sometimes it's blind. It's a lot of fun. So if you want to learn about that, bourbonbytes.com, or shoot me a message at bourbonbytes wherever you follow me. But that does it for this week's episode. This has been Bourbon Bytes, whiskey reviews with a gaming twist. Cheers, and I'll talk to you guys next episode. Bye.